Hello and welcome to Contramundum. I am Andrew Isker, and with me today is Ryan Turnipseed. Ryan writes for Old Glory Club. He is not CJ Engel. Unfortunately, CJ is predisposed at the moment. He's doing Heritage American things somewhere. Ryan, thank you for joining the show. Thank you for joining us. I know a lot of people are interested in your story, but right off the bat here, tell for everybody who's not familiar that's watching this, please tell us what happened with you, if you can.
Yeah, so I can go quick here, and then if you have a question, I'll let you focus in on it. Last January 2023, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which is supposed to be the conservative Lutheran denomination, probably worldwide, they have they're the beating heart of certainly all the conservative mission work done with Lutheranism across the world, and then in North America in particular, it's the conservative denomination. They put out a catechism that was Luther's large catechism, bound with a whole host of essays giving context, historical context, social commentary, theological application, and all this other stuff. The vast majority of these essays being mostly apolitical, but a great chunk of them being subversive, quite frankly. Left-wing, subversive. One of the essays was titled Integrating Social Justice into Lutheranism. There was quite a famous essay that equated pedophilia to other sexual sins and equalized all of them, so equating pedophilia to fornication, say, as if they're the same weight of evil, and on top of that, saying that if someone else is doing it, it's less bad because you have your own sin. So, sort of minimizing it in the face of all of us being sinful beings. This is the quality of essays that were bound up in this catechism. Something meant to explain what Christianity is. It's supposed to help in the formation of the Christian faith in individuals. So this is a big issue. I and a bunch of other people start criticizing it online. The thread that I put out got a lot of traction, got a few 100,000 views. The catechism was later pulled by the publishing house and the president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. A few weeks later, he put it back out, reaffirmed it, said it was a great book. A few things could have been worded better, which is perhaps one of the greatest understatements of last year. Especially considering the topic, the catechetical nature of the book. And then a few weeks after that, this president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, Reverend Matthew Harrison, put out a letter calling for the excommunication of the alt-right, is the word he used, from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. This is a letter that went out in 2023, not 2016 or 17, mind you. And that's an even bigger thing to note as well, just because the president of the Synod doesn't have the power to excommunicate people or to interfere in excommunications. That's due to our polity in the LCMS, that is a local decision that nevertheless has a universal consequence, but it is a local decision, a local matter. So that was already authority had been overstepped trying to get these people too far to the right that had criticized their precious book. And then later in that month, my pastor and then the sort of like the little overseer in this geographic circuit, they started to say that I need to be questioned for my online views and associations in particular, and they put on a facade for the first few months so that this had nothing to do with my criticisms of the catechism. They were just deeply concerned, was the words that they used, with my online associations and sayings.
That's always the word, deeply concerned.
Yeah. Yes, deep concern. And so a few weeks after trying to get details down, I should say before I move on here, this came after a string of basically botched church disciplinary matters, sort of one by one. So there was a very famous example where perhaps the farthest right member of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod was barred from his church by police. This would have been Mr. Mahler. He didn't attend any of his excommunication proceedings or any of these other things that should have happened in Christian process. He was declared excommunicated. His friend was excluded from the church, not by any official action, but just by social pressure, which is a very unchristian action indeed. And then in my Oklahoma district, there was an elder who was called into a meeting that included the whole board of elders for that congregation and the pastor. And he was forced, heavily pressured to resign his eldership, and he did that. Found out at the end of the meeting that he was not allowed a copy of the recording that was taken of that meeting. So before anything with me started, I met with the circuit visitor, who was that overseer figure that I mentioned earlier, and basically just said, "Hey, what the heck? Why do you have pastors and congregational leadership recording other people and not giving them copies of the meeting in which they were recorded in?" And the response that I was given was, "Well, why didn't he make his own recording?" So from then on out, I recorded absolutely everything that I was involved in.
Yeah.
And about a week later, my meeting rolled around. I was informed that there was going to be a small group of people that was not made known to me beforehand that were going to be present, including the leader of my board of elders, or my church's board of elders. And I got there, sat down at this little discussion. There was 4 of them, 1 of me. And the first thing I was asked was, "Do you trust us?" Which is a great sign for something like this. But the whole thing boiled down to that I was associating and promoting people with my platforms online that they didn't like. And it was not enough for me to go through the specific things they didn't like, so statements or beliefs or positions, and give my belief on that issue. I was demanded to denounce their whole person. If you want to know what exactly that means or entails, you're not going to get the answer, because I didn't either. That was the thing that was put before me, was I had to denounce their entire person, these too far to the right people that the church didn't like. I didn't give in, but just because that's not how Christian discipline or doctrine works. Let alone the sort of political nature of this. I wasn't.
Well, let me interrupt you just for a second, Ryan. But these guys that you are being told, commanded to denounce, neither of them were disciplined under, or at least according to the standing procedure of the Lutheran Church. Is that right?
So at the time, one of them had been falsely excommunicated, as I mentioned earlier. Wasn't even allowed to show up to the church property by police order, so secular authority was involved in this. The other one had no church discipline brought against him at all at this point in time. Only later.
Let me.
Okay.
Well, let me ask about the first one. So he was excommunicated, but not allowed to give his own defense. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically. This is Mr. Corey Mahler.
Okay.
My agreement on specific issues with him not being a standing matter in this issue.
No.
He was in a Christian congregation. He was barred from the premises by police action. And the only information that we have on this issue is that he was not allowed to show up for the proceedings. He was not allowed to give his own defense. We have so-called conservative pastors defending this action on theological and practical grounds, because he has already been declared a Nazi, so he shouldn't be able to defend his Nazi beliefs in front of the congregation, is the sort of like the narrative that's been going around right now, the accepted narrative. And this is I and everyone else in the LCMS are supposed to take this as a valid excommunication, which it clearly isn't. The other gentleman, Woe, which people can find on Twitter still and wherever else, these 2 men host what's called the Stone Choir podcast, deemed too far to the right, which is the whole impetus for me being brought in for questioning, is because I had once associated with them on my streams. And even potentially agreed with them on certain issues, which is a terrifying thing. If someone's far right, you can't agree with them even on the most basic facts of reality. Mm-hmm. And Woe at this point in time had no church discipline brought against him. He was a member in good standing. He still has not been disciplined. He was forced out of his church by social pressure, like Mr. Mahler's friend I mentioned earlier. So as it stands right now, there's been no doctrinal condemnation brought against Woe, to my knowledge at least, and certainly not to public knowledge. So these were the men that I was told to disavow their whole persons. Added on to this list, you can find him on Twitter, is a guy that now goes by the username, I think, of El Templar or something, a very strange name. He was considered too far to the right as well, which is very weird, because if you look at anything that this account posts, he says he votes Democrat, he lives in New York City, he has Jewish ancestry, he's a Roman Catholic, so the idea that he would be called a Lutheran far right-winger is a very strange accusation. So how does this guy end up on the docket of people that I'm supposed to disavow? Well, the answer to that is that all three of these gentlemen showed up on an Antifa dossier last February. And that was the information that was being used against me in my meeting. Not explicitly, but this is the only possible explanation for why this gentleman, El Templar, would show up alongside Stone Choir for me to disavow their whole persons. Is that my church and this little circuit that I'm in Oklahoma was just taking this Antifa information, this Antifa docket, at face value, which is has very frightening implications that I don't really need to spell out here.
No, and so yeah, I guess I'm just stuck on this fact. It might be my own ignorance of the polity of the LCMS and Lutheranism in general, and how excommunication is conducted. But it seems like within Protestantism generally, there is a trial, and you speak in your own defense. I mean,
Right.
not just Protestantism, but like all of Western Christianity, all of Christianity, Eastern. Like,
Right.
if you're being excommunicated, you can like legit heretics, right? Arius was able to speak in his own defense.
Yeah.
And but yet this guy was not.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
you're supposed to take it as legitimate. Like that's insane.
Yeah, the great reformer, or in the eyes of the papacy, the arch heretic Martin Luther, whichever side you're on that. Me being a Lutheran, you can easily tell which I am. He had multiple days where he was allowed to explain himself, come up with a defense, provide reasoning why he was not an arch heretic, and all this other stuff, which was ultimately discarded, granted. But he at least had the show trial, which the Lutheran Church right now is apparently not offering to people deemed too far to the right. It's one might even be able to say it's worse than Rome.
Well, yeah, this is something. I mean, in the chat here, I don't know if you can see it on your end of the screen there, but in the chat here, this has been on my mind too, because I'm vaguely aware of this stuff. I'm not super into the Lutheran Twitter world, but I have some interaction, and so this question here. Right. I'm curious about why the LCMS allows Pastor Ryan Muller to have a Marxist in his congregation, but a random church in Tennessee had excommunicate Corey Muller for having far right beliefs. And so, tell me about this. I mean, because I've seen this out there, that there are all of these legit, Antifa, open communists, right, open Stalinists that are in LCMS congregations. And maybe even pastors too, as far as I know. And nothing is done about these people at all. Yet they'll go to these lengths with anyone who's on the fringe right. Right. So, like, what can you say about that?
I mean, in the situation with Pastor Brian Wolfmueller, I don't frankly know much about that situation, except that there's a guy that's in the Democratic Socialists of America organization in his congregation that Pastor Wolfmueller defends, and that guy the congregant, the Marxist, claims that Wolfmueller defends him as well. So that's all that I know on that. Traditionally, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod explicitly condemns Marxism in all of its forms. As an atheistic and non-Christian doctrine. That's if you want to talk about excommunicating people because of political positions, that's the traditional view. Was specifically that Marxism, given that the LCMS is a German church, spoke German up until a few generations ago, dealt with the 1848ers coming over to the United States since the LCMS predated them. Marxism was a pretty heavy issue at the time. And that's the traditional stance, was that Marxism is completely incompatible with Lutheranism. But as for Wolfmueller and his congregation, I just don't know. I'm not going to level some sort of judgment on that just because I'm not involved in it. It does, however, point to the general trend, and this is why I was told in my own proceedings, is that I was told when I asked, is the church going to go after people that vote for the Democratic Party? Because the Democratic Party is specifically, actively pro-abortion. This is a system that has killed millions of people in the womb at the hands of their own mothers. This very, very evil system, far more evil than certainly any mass murder that one can conjure up from the last few centuries. And I was specifically told that the church is not going to persecute Democrats. To which my first response is, why would you consider this persecution? I just mentioned, is the church going to do the same thing to abortion supporters that was done to me? And that was the response that I got. So it doesn't take a genius or even literacy to see that this is the way things are going. Nothing is being done to the left, certainly. These actively anti-Christian leftists in the church by the hierarchy. And some people might hide behind procedure and say, well, the hierarchy doesn't go after people, congregations do. But that's clearly not been the case with me or anyone else. The Senate president has actively called for our excommunication because we were too far to the right and we criticized their book. There's no reason why that can't be applied to the some 40 or 50% of the LCMS that supports abortion in some capacity. So this is that's a very big issue that is not going to be solved, certainly not under the current administration. That being said, there are a great deal of pastors, I think, that are very ready to reverse any of this. They just currently aren't in power. So this is a very big issue that I can kind of let me skip ahead to the end of the story, sort of what happened.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's fine. It's just that it might, what I'm about to say might make more sense if we have the rest of that story down.
Okay, go ahead.
So that meeting ended with me not acquiescing at all, really. Mm-hmm. And I had recorded everything. Eventually, my congregation here in Ponca City decided that, well, what we need to do is subject Ryan to a tribunal. That's their words, not mine.
Okay.
It's on recording. That's not me being hyperbolic or anything. They said we need to put Ryan under a tribunal. And I thought I was being charitable. I said, all right, we can do that. I just have a list of things that I need met before this happens, including, like, I won't be cut off in my explanations. I still get to have my social media accounts or something like that, because that's like my fallback defense, since there's no real appeals process in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, is that I can just take it to the public square and let other Christians decide that aren't in this. And also that I would need some sort of a record kept of this. And none of this was given to me. I was basically just told that the men that are organizing this are pastors, and if you don't trust them, then that's your problem and not theirs. As if we all know that the title Reverend bestowed upon the clergy means that they are above reproach when it comes to matters of trust and legitimacy. So that's sort of what I was told to do. So that tribunal never happened. A few weeks later, after sort of letting this lie for a while, the semester had ended. I think it was May 18th or something, 2023. I published all of the recorded information that I had. And I should also note, this came after I had tried to kind of like call up the hierarchy. It's not the official way, because there is no official channel to sort of say, this is being done wrong, can I have an intermediary or something? So I called the Oklahoma District President, Reverend Nairns, couldn't get an answer. I called up the chain to vice presidents of the Synod, which aren't even necessarily involved in any of this. They're in like a sort of separate bureaucratic entity, but nonetheless hold some sway in the Synod. Didn't get an answer back. So after sort of just being left in the dark and subjected to this, I published everything, and that was the impetus for me being placed under what's called the minor ban in the LCMS. It's weird, sounds very Roman, but just as an explanation, there's no real biblical or theological grounding for this, especially not that any pastor can explain to me, and they'll admit this. It's a very practical measure. So just for like a normal use of the minor ban, Imagine that you're a pastor in a congregation. You find out that two of your congregants, or one of your congregants even, is cohabitating with someone else. And the answer to this is not to go for the nuclear option, just capitally excommunicate them, kick them out. What you would do if they refuse to sort of change this immediately is say, all right, you're under the minor ban. You're not going to be communed here. This is not a judgment that is supposed to be followed anywhere else, at least explicitly. Obviously, if it is contravened somewhere else, that's going to get like probably a angry phone call or something. But there's no expectation officially the minor ban is to be honored anywhere else. It's a stopgap measure. So basically, move out or marry, and until then, this is sort of the thing leveled against you. Okay. That's what's supposed to be used for normally. In my case, I had published all of this. And the next Sunday, if I remember correctly, or maybe it was before Sunday, it might have been Thursday or whatever, a few days later, I was told I was being placed under the minor ban for 5 charges. And these charges were that I had gone against the supposedly God-established authority of First Lutheran Church Ponca City, its pastor, and the Board of Elders. Only one of those entities has a real claim to God-established authority, and even then that's not a blank check for all actions for that entity. That's just saying where that person comes from. And so this was they said I had violated the commandment to respect those authorities and must repent. The next 2 charges were that I had, and I'm not exaggerating, this is purely guilt by association. I had associated and therefore supported people too far to the right. That was charges 2 and 3. And charges 4 and 5.
Verbatim is what they said?
I can get it verbatim because these are like paragraphs, but it's okay. Actually here I can read out the first sentence just to give you an idea. So charge 2, the first sentence is some of your posts on social media, public statements in support of certain individuals such as Corey Mahler and the online personality Woe, sow hatred by dividing individuals on the basis of race. So none of my statements, writings, or anything else have been shown to anyone throughout this process, including during my actual excommunication, which we'll get to shortly. So they are purely relying on my support for certain individuals. What that means, what that entails, to what degree, what line do you cross at which that is an excommunicable offense, is not established. That's just what they were going with. Charge 3. This is the first line from charge 3. Mahler and Woe, whom you continue to support, denigrate women in their podcasts and online posts. So that has nothing to do with me. They haven't elucidated what I supported, how that has any bearing on church disciplinary matters. That is just straight guilt by association. So that's charges 2 and 3. And then, going back to the core issue, the starting issue of all of this, charges 4 and 5 are that I wrongly and improperly criticized the large catechism that was released last January. So 40% of my charges for being placed under the minor ban had to do with my criticisms of that large catechism we mentioned at the start of this.
Did they ever say how you could have appropriately criticized the catechism?
No, they didn't, and that's because the LCMS does not have a proper channel for a layman, for the laity to go through. You have to go through as a congregation or through clergymen. You have to go through this drawn-out dispute process that, number one, is not guaranteed to fix any issues. Even though we now have all sides acknowledging that there are issues with this book, it's not guaranteed to actually fix any of them because it can just be shot down in the process. Sort of like a parliamentary procedure. That's not the exact organization, but you can think of it like that, like a bill being killed in a committee before it even reaches the floor. And then beyond that, you actually have to get one of those two entities, a congregation or a pastor, to start the process. And then years later, something might get done. And the whole time this issue will just continue to be published, continue to be propagated, used in seminaries as it currently is, and all this other stuff. So
they can publish. They can publish. Let me just make perfectly clear. Right? They can publish that pedophilia is just a burden that some people carry. Yep. Publish that in the catechism, and there is nothing any layman can do or say about it whatsoever without this happening to them.
Officially. Unless you're very connected, you're in the so-called Purple Palace, this little core bureaucratic heart in St. Louis for the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and you can like whisper into a few people's ears and get something pulled. There's no official channel, especially as was told to me by Reverend Hiley over the phone after this all started. There's no official channel for an individual layman to go through to dispute something, and this is where I'm going to start adding in my own value analysis here. So that's just the fact of the matter.
Yeah.
My own value analysis is that no matter what I did, even if it wasn't the official channels, even if they wanted to just not kill it on arrival, if they wanted to actually argue this out, the charge that's going to come back is that, well, the people involved with examining this whole issue are the ones that are also responsible for putting this out anyways. Because this is going to have theological oversight and all this other stuff that's going to come into dispute. And the theological board that we have, the Synod, is one of the biggest defenders of this catechism. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter what official channel is used. The people responsible are going to find themselves not guilty of anything. That's just how any bureaucratic entity will work if it checks itself. You don't need to have a fancy degree or a research paper to prove that. That is a pure incentive structure. So,
yeah.
No matter what official channel went through, even if I waited the years and years to get this disputed, not me, someone else. If someone else waited the years and years to get this disputed, the thing that was going to come back was nothing is really wrong with this. There might be a few issues. Also, you didn't do this correctly. Because that's something else they'll throw out at you, is that you didn't dispute it correctly. No matter what you do, if you say anything against someone in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, you're going to have a whole cavalcade of defenders saying that you broke the Eighth Commandment by asserting that they have done something wrong, because it's not proven yet, and the only way you can prove it is by saying something is wrong. So you have this catch-22 going, where you're not allowed to officially dispute anything. So that's what I was accused of not going through. That's 40% of my charges for the minor ban. Mm-hmm. And at this point in time, I could not commune at First Lutheran Church Ponca City. De jure, I could commune anywhere else. So that's okay. What the minor ban entails. So I sort of let this lie for a few months, and then towards the end of this last December, going into 2024 now, a group of pastors from across the country reached out to me, and I was told, hey, why don't you reach out to Reverend Hiley at Ponca City again to achieve some sort of reconciliation, see if something can't be done about this. And, I wasn't going to just say no off the bat, so sure. I reached out to Reverend Hiley, tried to get meetings scheduled to get a more precise list of charges against me as well, because this is public, the charges for the minor ban. You can read them. There's like grammatical errors, let alone theological vagaries. So the first thing about reaching out to Hiley at the start of this year, sort of the end of last year, was, can we get a clearer list of charges and have the charges tied to something that I have done? Because that's the other thing. So far, I was placed on the minor ban for assertions. They asserted that this bad thing had happened. Not one thing specifically did they tie this to. If it's tweets, they did not tie it to any sort of tweet. They just said, oh, your tweets in general are bad. Sort of like a very, very vague assertion. For support, as we mentioned earlier, they were just going for the whole black and white picture. You have supported by our standards, therefore you must completely condemn them by our standards. Totally.
Would they define what those standards are, or did they?
Well, that was the whole point of this meeting. Can you define any of this? Tie it to something? Can you get a sleeker list of charges? And then on top of that, then I wanted a second meeting to sort of discuss the charges. Sort of see if some sort of agreement could be reached. And in both of these meetings, I asked for a silent witness. And after a couple of months of trying to get something hammered out, Reverend Hiley took up until I think the end of March to actually here. Let me just check really quickly. It took weeks and weeks to get any of these details hammered out, as if this wasn't really that big of a deal. Like this is me bringing some sort of you can call it a personal slight or something. I'm not going to press this too hard, but this is Church of Discipline. I'm being barred from accessing a sacrament.
Yeah. And
it's taking weeks and weeks to get something hammered out for me to meet and discuss about this. Yeah. So I was I was kind of annoyed. I'll admit that, rightfully or wrongly, I was annoyed. I viewed this as a slight against me, and I had reached out to Reverend Hiley at the start of February, and then finally I got something that looked a little bit more tangible at the start of March, and in this email finally where he is trying to get tangibilities hammered out, I was told, we're not going to have a witness, and also the purpose of this meeting is now for you to come to repentance. So that was the meeting. The purpose of the meeting had changed. I was denied a witness, and this was sort of being immediately railroaded into whatever they wanted to meet with me with, not any sort of compromise, not any sort of good faith discussion, not even for me to just receive a clear list of charges. They were doubling down most thoroughly. And I should also mention that in this email, where I was told all of this, the font size of the email had changed, the tone of the email had changed, the sign-off for Reverend Hiley had changed, and it did not read like anything that I'd ever really heard from him. Just a very strange detail. I have no further information on that, and that's the fact of the matter. It's a very weird thing to have received.
Yeah.
So that was...
I'll just comment, if you're going to take an email that's written by, I don't know, the president of the denomination, at least, change the font to what you normally do. And
right, yeah.
Paraphrase it in your own words, but
I changed the sign off back to what he had consistently been using for every other email that I had received from him.
That's just wild, man. I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's nuts. It seems to me, and just from an outsider perspective, that, like you're saying, or at least alluding to maybe, that the denominational structure, the hierarchy, the people at the top are dictating to him, you got to do something about this Turnipseed kid because he's a problem, and do whatever you got to, right? Throw everything against the wall, make whatever you can stick, because he embarrassed us with the catechism, right? That's what it seems like.
It's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that perspective, because on recording in the original thread that I put out last May, you can hear in one of the elders' meetings that they're specifically saying, we can't just get him for guilt by association. We need something else that'll stick, basically, is what they're saying. So they acknowledge they're looking for charges to get me in their own meeting. It's a very strange process, this. So anyways, and I was, so not only, also, in response to that, I basically just said, all right, fine. It was a very heated email, which I'll admit, but even after it was looked over by several people inside and outside the LCMS and clergy and lay alike, they determined it was an appropriate response. So it doesn't really trouble me that it was a heated email. I basically just said that if Christ can condescend to us, then I can condescend to you. If I were going to have this meeting without me having a witness, I need a recording. That was the main thing. There are a few other smaller issues, but that was the main thing, is I am going to be recording this if I cannot have a witness. Yeah. And I received an email back on April 2nd, finally, so this had drawn out to April, and I was basically told, nope, there will be no recording. There's no, there are no two sides to this. We're all one group here, but you're an unrepentant sin, so that has to be dealt with. This is just, I don't, this is sick. This is just manipulative. This is not how you go about pastoring any. I'm just looking at this, say it's not over this issue. Say it's somebody that's, an unrepentant homosexual, and for whatever reason he still wants to be part of the church, and you're going through discipline. You wouldn't do that. You would say, no, you can't have a witness. You can't have recordings. We're not going to carry out due process whatsoever. We're just going to tell you what for, and that's going to be it. This is nuts. Yeah, and I online, people unrelated to this have accused me of trying to sort of Americanize or politicize this issue by appealing to things like due process, because you can't find the two verbatim words due process in Scripture, as if this is somehow a non-Christian concept. So my appeals to something like a set system that we have agreed upon that is fair to both sides have been maligned, if that's of any consolation. So April 2nd, I got back that denial, basically just saying, nope, you will not have a recording. So April 8th, April 8th, the Monday, if it's not April 8th of that week. I handed in a letter to the congregation at First Lutheran. The church secretary received it, where I basically just said, I'm rescinding all spiritual ties, my membership, anything related to any of you. And everything was quiet for a few weeks. Nothing had really happened, and I was just going about with my life with other more productive things. And then, if you can guess where this is going, perhaps the strangest and perhaps even stupidest move that could have happened after that, Wednesday, April 24th, 9 a.m., I received a very short email from Reverend Hiley, and it reads, Ryan, in light of your continued impenitence and your refusal to submit to church discipline, Pastor Hiley and the Board of Elders will present the case for your excommunication to the congregation on Sunday, May the 5th, 2024, immediately after the conclusion of the divine service. You are invited to be present for the proceedings. So, weeks after I had rescinded any ties to this congregation, finally I get the notice that they are going to, capital E, excommunicate me. A very, very strange turn of events, especially because in Lutheran theology in particular, and this is official theology as well, that like the Synod nominally holds to as like the source beyond scriptures or the explanation of that we hold by our church disciplinary matters, found in this book right here. If someone self-excludes, so they say, I quit the congregation or something, there is no longer any jurisdiction or room for that congregation to level a disciplinary condemnation. They've excluded themselves. They've declared they are not in that congregation, so the congregation no longer needs to declare they are not in this congregation. It's a very simple matter, and this comes from even the... if I remember correctly, I think this comes from the abuses of papal excommunications, which, on top of the spiritual and implications, entailed like a forfeiture of property and ownership and all this other stuff. So that I think that's kind of what this is in response to. If you need a something besides just the scriptural motivation to explain this, it's correcting abuses in the papacy. That's why we hold to this. If someone excludes themselves from the congregation no longer has oversight over them. The jurisdiction is dissolved. So weeks after I had handed in this letter, having heard nothing from anybody, I finally received this email saying, yeah, on May the 5th, we're going to start the proceedings to excommunicate you. You are invited to be present. Not, we would like you to be present, we need you to be present, is there a date you can be present? We invite you to be present. This is happening whether you want it to or not. So if they had asked, they would have known that I was going to be in Tulsa that day for something that I had, it was an obligation I had had for weeks and weeks beforehand, that I needed to go to. This wasn't a superfluous activity by any stretch of the imagination. This was professional. And you know, I was invited to attend my own excommunication proceedings. You know,
from a church you are not attending.
Yeah. So a church that I'm not attending may or may not rule against me in abstention.
The question I have, and this is again my own ignorance of the Lutheran polity, but when a person announces, I'm leaving, I'm going to a different congregation, that kind of thing, is there a membership transfer, or how are those things, conducted?
Well, so if I had said I'm joining a different congregation, the pastor of that congregation would have sent a request for transfer. Okay. But that wasn't what I was doing. I was handing in a letter that very directly and dryly said I'm quitting the congregation. Yeah. So as of those weeks, at least in my mind and every other clear-thinking person, I was not affiliated with any congregation at all. I had no membership anywhere. And even in the LCMS, laity aren't members of the LCMS itself. They're members of congregations. The congregations as a whole and clergy are the only members of the LCMS. So I was never a member of the LCMS to begin with, and I certainly, in my mind and everyone else's, was not a member of First Lutheran Church in Ponca City after April 8th, about 9:30 in the morning. So that was this was a surprise, to say the least. Now, May 5th rolled around, and like I said, I had other things that I had to be in another place for, and beyond that, I handed in my rescension. I wasn't going to legitimize this by showing up as if I was still a member of which they had jurisdiction over. So even on top of the practical necessity that I couldn't be there, I wasn't going to attend. And I have no issue with saying that. There's no just reason for me to attend this. My stepmother did attend, because the rest of my family was also in this congregation with me. Some of them still are. My stepmother attended these proceedings just to sort of see what was going on. She wasn't allowed to vote because she hadn't voted for the past 3 years of meetings or whatever. Fine, that's not what the issue was. No one cares really. Every single attendee was asked to sign a statement or a paper saying they would not make their own recording of the proceedings, that the minutes that were kept would be the official telling of the story from here on out. So that's the first thing that they were told to sign.
This is like the FBI. This is what the FBI did. They don't record anything, and they just we keep our own records. We write down our own documents, and that's what's that. Like
yeah, and you're supposed to accept it. Yeah, that's the very strange part of this matter. So that was the first thing that they were met with, and then finally they presented the case for my excommunication on those prior 5 points to the congregation. Remember those 5 points? There was one point that said I disrespected their authority, that was God established. There were 2 more points saying that I had associated with the wrong people, and finally 2 other points saying that I had unfairly criticized the large catechism. So you have to make, in any clear system, you would have to prove each of those 5 points to excommunicate me on those 5 points.
Yeah.
The only piece of evidence that came from me, the only statement of mine that came from me for this entire proceeding, was that I had shared a Stone Choir episode. That was the only thing from me that they showed to the congregation the entire time, for which they then voted, and I'll clarify this in a second, unanimously to excommunicate me. And this was after questions from people saying, hasn't Ryan rescinded his membership? Why are we doing this? Can't we just say he's gone and be done with it? The pastor and the elders responded in a way that is not only malicious, but breaks the theology behind the whole thing. They declared this a punitive action from their own words, and they likened it to a child who has been doing wrong and who suddenly stops, and that you then still have to punish the child even after the child stops doing something. So in Lutheran theology, we do not consider excommunications or church discipline to be punitive measures. And that's certainly not what's in our theology in the book that I just held up earlier, or in any of the other 2 books which touch on this matter that we have officially accepted, and rightfully so. In our theology, church discipline is something that's supposed to bring the person lovingly back to Christ. It's not punitive. That's why they're usually swept under the rug, is because you don't want it to look like this is a public vendetta from congregation against the excommunicant. This is the whole reason behind it, and this is why it's also like the nuclear option, is because usually there are other ways you can bring people that are erring back into Christ, which didn't really happen here. We jumped from impromptu meeting to tribunal to nuclear option, but they declared this punitive in the proceedings. And after this, there were a few other questions that were lodged, but they declared that I had been unanimously excommunicated by the voters, and beyond this, a congregant raised their hand and they said, well, I didn't vote yes. How is this unanimous? I didn't vote at all. I abstained. And their response to this, after a little bit of deliberation, was to say, well, we changed the rules for this post hoc, or maybe even ad hoc, depending on if they said it or not beforehand. I don't have that detail. We're not going to acknowledge abstentions. So basically, if you abstain in this vote, it's not going to count as an absence of a yes out of a total. They're just going to subtract it from the total of votes. So they didn't even need to get a unanimous vote. This is also against our theology, but it's not something that they specifically instituted. It had been on the books in this congregation for at least a few years. So this isn't their problem, though they didn't fix it. They just need 2/3 of a vote. Why they would go to this extremity to say I had been unanimously excommunicated to the point where they would completely rework the rules regarding abstaining from votes, I do not know. But that's my unanimous excommunication by their official telling of the story. So that's the charge. The only thing that was brought up from me was that I had shared a Stone Choir episode, and that was enough to prove those 5 points that I mentioned earlier. And that's where we stand now. So none of this is going to be done in this synod, certainly not from on high, against the increasingly growing ranks of leftists, anti-Christian leftists. we had a youth gathering, if I remember correctly, in 2022, where we had organizations called things like Lutherans for Racial Justice, leading breakout sessions with children about religious pluralism and how to accept refugees and all these other things. Nothing's going to be done against them. They still hold sway in the Synod. They will never once have anything bad happen to them, even though one of their clergymen that were part of this organization just accepted a position at an ELCA university. For those that don't know, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA, is the non-Lutheran, non-Christian, very left-wing conglomeration of left-wing Lutheran churches from the 80s, if I remember correctly. I think it was 83 that they formed. So, yeah, that's the sort of people that will not have anything happen to them by this current hierarchy. Having said that, in light of this issue, in light of that youth gathering, and every other thing that's been leading up to this, I am personally optimistic because there's an ever-growing rank of laity and clergy who are disputing this quite actively. And I'm not necessarily sure in what way they're going to do this, but I know the discontent is there. I don't think that this will in any way, shape, or form be tolerated by anyone across the Synod. Whether that's from the West Coast to the East Coast to the center, I don't think that this is going to be allowed to stand, at least not quietly. I don't have anything that I can show to anyone that would give a proof for that. But that's my reading of the atmosphere right now. Okay. That's also why, unlike say Mr. Mahler's excommunication, no one's been parading this around online. I think they realize this is a losing issue for them. I think they realize they've overextended, and that's why they're not parading this around very publicly, saying we got the other Nazi, Ryan Turnipseed, the guy that writes for the Ludwig von Mises Institute, that famous National Socialist organization. Yeah. So. Yeah, they aren't parading this one around so much, and I think they realize that this is not the greatest move they could have made, especially with all of these facts in light. Even if they'd done it properly, probably wouldn't have been a great move anyways. So they realize that. There are a growing number of voices online, especially this morning. I believe it was Reverend David Ramirez that posted a small little a short essay on Facebook, where he basically just said we need to start asking questions. Why is this being allowed to stand? What are the rules regarding this? Do we even have anything stated that we can compare this to? Because if not, that's not Christian. And then beyond this, if we do have rules, why is it not being enforced equally? Who's responsible for that? So I'm not giving up on the LCMS. I mean, even if the LCMS does the most wildly wrong thing possible, that's not convincing me against Lutheran theology. The LCMS postdates Lutheran theology by a good few centuries. So this hasn't convinced me that Lutheran theology is wrong. It's just convinced me that the current crop of leadership in the LCMS is dead wrong. So
yeah. Well, man, that all of it. It's nuts. Like I can't. I'm at a loss for words to describe this story. It makes no sense. But I want to get to a few of the questions. There have been a few that have come in while you were talking about this. First is from the other Paul. So for Ryan, have any of the pastors trying to ruin you even attempted to give an account for how their standards would obviously see Luther and other 16th, 17th century Lutheran leaders excommunicated?
Sure, and I've brought this up for the last year or so. Basically just saying that the theology that's on the books from conventions from the 80s or the 70s or the 90s or whatever that condemn racism and anti-Semitism and whatever else, categorically, by the way, as if God or Christ have never done anything that could be potentially interpreted as racist. Christ talking to the Syrophoenician woman might come to mind. So that's a strange theological position to hold for Christians that nominally hold to biblical inerrancy. But I have brought this up quite continually. The people involved in this specific matter, so Reverend Hiley, any other clergy or lay that were involved in my meetings, any time that I bring up historical standard, I would usually be accused of trying to derail the discussion, bring it off topic or something, as if it didn't have any bearing against or on what was being done. Or I would be told that they were wrong. And this is that last point is usually the That's the mainline opinion within the LCMS. The mainstream conservative opinion is that, well, they're all just wrong by our standards of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, or whatever else. Luther, Melanchthon, Chemnitz, all of these other great Lutheran fathers, CFW Walther, the first president of the LCMS, and basically everyone up until a few generations ago were just wrong. And to maintain their legitimacy, they will say that doesn't make them non-Christian; they're just wrong. But if you do the same thing, then you're an excommunicant now, and you are not a Christian. As if the people that they are talking about didn't have the intellectual fortitude for introspection. So that's the line that's maintained. It's paradoxical and contradictory. Perhaps by design. I don't think they really care about the truth of the matter here. But personally, that irks me more than most of the things that were done to me. This sort of trashing and throwing away of Lutheran heritage, because I'm a convert to Lutheranism. My family converted to Lutheranism when I was a sophomore in high school. I think I was 14 or 15. I can't really remember what age I was. But it was in high school. I had gone to a Lutheran school from pre-kindergarten all the way up until the 8th grade when the school system ended in our town. And I really liked Lutheran history. I liked the Lutheran heritage, the Lutheran theology. I wanted to go to the church that believed what these people, Luther, Walther, Chemnitz, Melanchthon, and all these other Lutheran reformers believed, because I found them to be correct, not because I just idolized each individual man themselves. And just to see this crusade against the far right being buttressed by a complete destruction of Lutheran heritage, Lutheran theology, anything that generated Lutheranism, has really been a great personal issue with me, because I actually like these people, these old, centuries-old great men. And it leaves me with the question that if the beating heart of supposedly conservative Lutheranism won't stand by their heritage, then who will? It seems like there's not going to be anyone that will accept these Lutheran fathers in the next couple of generations. And that's part of what motivates me, is I want a real Lutheran church for my progeny and for my community. That's something that I want. I don't want this to just be destroyed after this generation gets done with their anti-racist and anti-Nazi crusades, and after they've completely destroyed every tangible reality that Christianity has to offer. I want a church. I don't want it destroyed after this generation, just so it can satisfy the world.
Yeah, and I mean, unlike the people who took proceedings against you and some of these other guys, it appears in the chat there's some people that are disagree, a little bit disagreeing with you, and so I'll bring in some of their questions, just to play devil's advocate and let them, let you answer them. There's one. This one here, Frog Rules. How many times did you meet with your pastor to discuss these things? And the other question is from the same person. Couldn't breaking the 8th commandment also just be communicating online in such a way where you don't put the best possible construction on things? So what do you have to say to those things?
Yeah, so the first one, how many times did I discuss any of this with the people involved? Was number one, I didn't know that this was a specific issue that they were taking. This was a specific thing they were taking issue with until they brought it to me. First, without my knowledge, like this is on March 1st. Whenever any wind that something was going to be done about me came to my father, I was not included on any of these communications, and my father himself was included on a separate communication, while the rest of the elders got a more detailed rundown of what was going on. So this was done in secrecy to begin with.
They kept him in the dark. Okay.
They tried to. Thankfully, at this point in time, there were other elders that had a conscience about this, and so they just told him, "Hey, you weren't included in this email, and it deals with you and your son. This might be of interest to you." He
was an elder in the church as well. He was on the board of elders, and they kept it from.
Yeah, they gave him a separate email, and so number one, this was sort of kept secret from me. But despite that, back in January, a few days, or I don't know, maybe it was the day after the catechism was pulled, or maybe it was the day after this went viral or something. I don't remember which specific point this was. I called Reverend Hiley. At the point in time, I was sort of going between two churches, because I was also in college at Oklahoma State University. There was a pastor there. So depending on the weekend, I'd either go there or I'd go to my home congregation, which is in Ponca City. So And that guy, that pastor in Stillwater, was emphatically in support of taking down that large catechism. He only flipped basically right before the meeting started with me and the other people that we talked about earlier. So he was against all the stuff to begin with. And even when I warned him that, hey, you're probably going to start receiving pressure, he sort of shrugged it off and laughed that such a thing could be possible. So hubris. But with Reverend Hiley, I called him specifically after this thing picked up, became a thing. And I just informed him, here's what's happened. He immediately was displeased with it. His channels that he wished I had gone through was that he wished that I had talked to each one of the authors that I took issue with personally to get their interpretation of what they wrote. Not to get a correction or anything, but just so that I could understand what they really meant by the words that were on the paper. So he wanted me to just individually speak with each of these authors that I had no clue who they really were. I didn't care who the authors were. That was not my intent when criticizing this, was not to get the authors. It was these doctrines are in this book labeled catechism, and that's a big issue.
Yeah.
So
it's not just some random guys that have the wrong opinions in the synod. This is the official doctrinal statement of the LCMS that is saying this. So this isn't just something, off to the side or tangential. Like, this is right in the dead center of the LCMS's theology.
Right.
They're saying. And so this is a big deal.
Yeah, so and it was completely non-personal to me, and he thought that's where the issue lied, was I was trying to just go after these authors or something. So already he didn't quite understand the purpose here. He was audibly displeased, did not have a joyful demeanor in the slightest, and he didn't really give any. He just sort of accepted it. Was my takeaway of that. It was about an hour and a half long phone call. An hour and 15 minutes of which had nothing really to do with this issue. So that was sort of the that was the first discussion. So after this, whenever that sort of those secret memos went out and all this other stuff on March 1st, I met twice with the overseer pastor, the circuit visitor, the college, the campus pastor. I met twice with him to sort of figure out what was going on, what was their issue, and all this other stuff, because they were bringing an issue to me. So this was not, I was bringing an issue to these clergy, they were bringing it to me. So I met with them, even though I'm not obligated to do that. If someone has an issue with me, I'm not obligated to resolve it. That's on them. At least that's the whole point of the Matthew 18 process that everyone loves, is that if you have an issue, you go to the person you have an issue with. Even then, I met twice with this pastor in Stillwater, and the first meeting, it was cheerful atmosphere. I was assured it wasn't anything big. They were just meeting with me to sort of confirm that what they already knew, which was that I was a fine Christian in their eyes and whatever else. So that was the first meeting. In the second meeting, I was explicitly told that word had come down from on high to basically question me thoroughly. So that meeting was much more dour. Had a lot more very pregnant pauses whenever people were saying things. So I met twice with them. Then they met with me in that roundtable discussion, if you want to call it that, about a week later, the one that was recorded and put up on my Twitter. And then after that, I wasn't going to reignite the whole thing, because if they were going to drop the subject, because that's what I thought they were going to do, they had mishandled it so terribly, and they had acknowledged that. They had apologized for how they had mishandled the meeting to me. That's a communication to me that I have in my phone from text message. I thought they were just going to drop it, and that's certainly what I would do. I would be dearly embarrassed if I was in charge of that meeting and how terribly it was conducted. I would just try to drop the issue and hope that everyone forgot about it. So I wasn't going to poke the bear and try to reignite the whole issue. And in my mind, that would be a mean thing to do. So I do try to be charitable, whether or not that's interpreted by everyone else. So finally, when I hear from their elders meetings that they want to put me through a tribunal, then I reach out to them. They did not reach out to me about putting me through tribunal. I reached out to them and said, I heard you were wanting to put me through a tribunal. Here's like a fair list of points. I think it was 5 for me to trust this thing. And they denied it completely. So This whole thing is marked by me reaching out to them, just trying to say, here's what I need to trust this. I'm still willing to meet with you all. And then even then, at the start of this year, I reached out to Reverend Hiley to try to have a discussion for reconciliation. And we went through that earlier. So I did meet with them multiple times. The only time that they specifically met with me was that recorded meeting that happened last March. I think it was the 7th or something. It was a Thursday evening. So, and then as for breaking the 8th commandment, not putting the best constructions on everything, putting the best construction on something is bounded by the circumstance. So if we have a book that we are putting out that is a catechism meant for the formation of faith in Christians and an explanation of what our doctrines are, if there is something that is vague in there, the window for putting a best construction on it is very limited, because this has real consequences. This is a very important book. So if someone does something that mishandles a subject, the best construction on this is not they didn't mishandle the subject. The best construction on this is they didn't intend to mishandle the subject. Because the fact of the matter is the subject was mishandled. So that's an example here. As for me saying that I'm being purged deliberately, which I will say, is that we had a whole string of laymen that led up to me being purged. They were purged before me as well. 2 people were excommunicated. 2 other people were forced out. A friend of one of these people was pressured out of the congregation and is no longer even a Protestant. So that's the fruit of this whole thing. So me saying that I'm being purged, what best construction can I put on this to say that I'm not being purged? What is the best construction here? That they're true believers? Well, then this would be a purge. They would acknowledge this as a purge if they're true believers. Are they being duped? Well, then I'm insulting their intelligence. Is that really putting the best construction on this? Are they just really scared of some synod hierarch dangling a sword over their head saying, if you don't get this guy, then we will get you? Well, then that's me putting the worst construction on the synod hierarch. So this whole best construction as a doctrine meant to absolve everyone of anything that means you can no longer point out issues in the world is not how it's meant to be used. With best construction theology, the Lutheran 8th commandment, as we number it, basically what it's saying is that if you have an issue with someone, if you see an issue, you're not to assume the worst of them. And I certainly do not assume the worst of people, both for the sake of this theology and also just because I don't usually have the proof that the worst has happened. I don't want to act on things that aren't real. That's how you mess things up. So that's how I would address that issue.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, just with the catechism alone, there isn't a good way. I mean, you're not, even when I didn't see from you anyway, I saw other people commenting on it and making assumptions about the authors or what the LCMS was doing and things like this. But when I read the things that you wrote about it, and I could be wrong, I didn't read everything you've ever written about it. Maybe there's something out there, but you were dealing strictly with what was there on paper and what the meaning of those words was and the impact that it would have, because it is the catechism of your synod. Not saying, assuming their motives or what they're trying to do or doing any of those things. That would be violating. I'm Reformed, so it's the 9th commandment. But that would be violating the commandment, right? To not bear false witness, because you can't prove what their motives are or what they were trying to do. You can only deal with what is there out there in public on paper. And if you can't say this is bad, equating pedophilia with fornication and saying, or even, I mean, I saw the video of Matthew Harrison, with a sermon that basically said the same thing, that transgenderism and pedophilia and all these things, these are just specks in our brother's eye. Right? It's even worse with
the thing you're talking about there from Harrison is even worse, and it's public. And the statement he made was, I see the drag queen in the library, and I know what their sin is, but I know what's in my own heart, and I know it's far worse. Or sorry, he says that he doesn't know the full sins of the drag queen or something. To which
mine is worse.
Yeah, I know mine is worse. To which the correct response to that in any other era is just, if you're saying you have worse sins than the drag queen preying on children at a public library and you're heading a church organization, the response to that is to get you out of the leadership. quite frankly. That's me
Yes.
speaking. That's not me on behalf of anyone else. That's me as a Christian speaking. So,
Yeah.
um, so
It's crazy, man. Like I just I mean maybe it's my unfamiliarity with the way things are done in the LCMS, or just the having a pulse on things, especially among the older, boomer, age leadership, and how they view things. I mean, some of it just seems kind of like boilerplate, very squishy, um, evangelicalism, where
yeah,
oh, we're all sinners, we're all bad, and these things are all sins the same, and it's like, no, that's not true. These are horrible things that have to the state has to use force to suppress, and it's good
right,
to,
right.
and
Well,
and,
and
and they're
even
downplaying it.
even spiritually, disregarding the temporal effects, that we
Yeah.
obviously treat different transgressions differently. We assign a different punishment to white lies than say we do to armed robbery, and
Yeah.
rightfully so. Spiritually, Christ himself treats these things different. He offers a millstone into the depths of the waters to people that lead children astray.
Yes.
Clearly, he does not view this as equal to any other sin that he just comes across, because he does not offer a millstone for any other transgression throughout the Gospels. This is
Yes.
it's a very very strict and extreme punishment spiritually that Christ offers, because he says that is better than what's waiting for those people. This is a
Yes.
so that's
Yeah. I know. I can't get over that. And I think someone in the chat said, like, your actual offense, the charge they can't bring against you, but what it really is you embarrassed the boomers, right? That's what that's what you did. And I think it's true. Like I think looking at the overarching um narrative surrounding all of these things, and not just exclusively at the LCMS, is this kind of stuff is going on throughout all of Christendom, every tradition, right? It's in my world, in the Reformed world, in denominations that I've been a part of. It's in evangelicalism. It's in the Southern Baptist Convention. It's everywhere, and um, the parallels, the similarities between these things is you have this older leadership class, right? The old guys, the gray hairs that have their hands on the levers of power in the various denominations and so forth, that are very accustomed to what the world calls sin, right? The
right,
world calls these things, this is the worst possible sin you could do, which is all post-war consensus stuff, right?
right.
It's
Yeah,
all,
it all
if you
boils down
sin
to you were
against,
mean to this person.
yeah, if you sin against the Civil Rights Act, right, you are going to hell, right? That's like the basis of their entire morality. And you transgress that, boom, it's over, right? And so, like, you see this too, where you have so many of these young men, right? You see it all over the, maybe you see it with like Nick Fuentes and all the the gripers and all of these young guys that listen to him, all these Zoomers online that are realizing we've been lied to about lots of things, right? We've been
Right,
lied to about um everything for the last 100 years, right? The whole world that they've told us is not real, and it's all fake. And they're awakening to something. And some of them, of course, probably a little too extreme and certainly very obnoxious online. But they have all of these young men, and they can't do anything but just bash them over the head and say these are bad people, these are horrible guys.
right,
We have to purge them from our denominations, when most of them, right, really almost all of them, they care about the same cultural things that conservative Christians do,
right.
right?
Yep,
They see the drag queens, they see the promotion of homosexuality, they see the promotion of fornication, they see the holocaust of abortion, right? The murder of millions of people every year, right? They see that stuff and they're disgusted by it, they hate it,
right,
and they want nothing to do with these guys, right? They want nothing to do with these young men who see the evils of our day, because, right, they're not buying what the culture is selling them on what the culture says is sin.
right.
And so it That's the thing that bugs me about this overall. I mean, besides just the horrible story that you've told us about, because I think a lot of people have been in situations like this, and dealing with churches where it's the deck is stacked against you. Any procedure that is normal, that where there's due process, where witnesses are allowed, where charges are brought against you, they're clearly defined. It's black and white. This is a sin. Did you do it or not? Right. None of that was followed. It's horrible. It's terrible, which tells you, like, yeah, obviously they do not want you to be able to defend yourself. Right. That's because you would vindicate yourself in this.
Yeah,
you don't have anything.
Right, and to the earlier point about the glut of very right-wing young men, most of whom, as they keep getting doxxed, are accomplished. They're intelligent. They just use anonymous accounts.
They're not because losers in their mom's basement.
Right. Yeah. The usual charge by these very public mainline conservative pastors is that they're just losers. That's why they hide behind anonymous accounts, as if these, and it's exceedingly tone deaf at the very least, just because. All of these conservative pastors apparently can't imagine a scenario in which you're beholden to worldly forces for your income for you and your family, because they get paid for by their congregation that's against the world. So, let's talk about how this works here, about these pastors that go after the glut of young right-wing men. So you get told, you get preached constantly by these very popular conservatives. You know, they're conservative insofar as they're against the things that other more popular Christians are against, like abortion, homosexual marriage, and all this other stuff. But they wouldn't go anywhere near as far as right-wing as it was 50 years ago, say. You know, they're not going to talk about the state influenced by laws on churches, you know, basically it's going to force them to accept all this in a few generations. They're never going to talk about that because the laws are unquestionable. As you mentioned, it's the Civil Rights Acts. So they're going to just keep hammering these young men, because these young men are they accuse them of intertwining politics with religion. That's what they tell these far right young men. You can't make politics your gospel, despite the fact that their whole preaching about you can't put Christianity in politics is itself a political statement. You're using Christianity in a political context to prevent Christians from organizing. I believe that was your point the other day. I think you said that, and I'm shamelessly using it here.
I think maybe it was Stephen Wolf, but yeah.
It might have been. It might have been.
Yeah. So he's much smarter than me, so we'll give it to him.
Well, it's a very pertinent point. So they will try to get Christians not to go into politics in a very political statement, and they'll appeal to the laws of the country and all this other stuff, and they'll use that to supersede theology. And when these young right-wing men come around that want a traditional church, as it was not even 100 years ago, though some hope for something even better than that, they get told that they are making politics their gospel. And how is that proven? Well, it's because they go against things that you're not allowed to go against in a respectable society, like the Civil Rights Acts. So how are they making the politics their gospel? It's because they aren't holding by the other political thing they're supposed to hold by to be a real Christian. So that's what they're being told. These young right-wing men are being told by these very moderate and limp-wristed conservative clergymen that are currently running the LCMS. This is the cadre in charge of all these purges of the far right. It's the conservative faction, not the liberals, not the Marxists or the leftists or whomever else. It's the conservatives enabling them. And then whenever these young right-wing men try to go and do something, try to make their own spaces, they convince other members of the clerical class into their position, or maybe the clergy already believed in this stuff and is now going public. Well, then suddenly this strict stance of discipline that couldn't be found for anything else in the last 40 or so years, not against liturgical abuses, getting rid of things that Lutherans are supposed to hold by in regards to how services are conducted, not against left-wing invasions into our theology regarding human social structures or anything else. We had to tolerate that. We had to just let it go. We aren't meant to be strict judges upon every single individual. But as soon as these unrespectable anons, these right-wing men, start to say something that might damage the respectable reputations of these popular conservative pastors of the world that are currently running things, then suddenly we find the strict stance of discipline that was missing these last 40 or so years. We couldn't have applied it to people voting abortion into law or whatever else, but we can apply it to the groiper, because that is apparently the biggest issue for the church right now. And if they're saying that young right-wing men are the thing that they dislike the most, as evidenced by their actions, I'm going to believe them. And I'm going to use that implication for whatever I need to.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think looking at it too, Ryan, I remember seeing, and maybe you could elucidate this a little bit more because you brought it up a couple times. I remember seeing, it was maybe a Pew Research poll or Barna or something like that, and it broke it down by denominational affiliation, that like 50% of the LCMS votes for Democrats and is pro-choice. Right? Is that accurate, or do you have better stats than I do?
Yeah, so in regards to the poll, it's not that they vote Democrat. It's that they support, just as an ideological issue, they support abortion in some or all cases. So basically just as a binary, do you believe abortion should ever be accepted in any scenario at all? So from the littlest to the most, or not at all, 50% of the LCMS is on the wrong side, the anti-Christian side.
Mm-hmm.
And then in regards to all these other things, so the LCMS numbers on the rosters, not the rosters because that's for clergy, but for the membership numbers, are probably themselves bloated, because we don't actually take people off of membership rolls if they don't attend for the time that we say that they should be attending for, or whatever else, because we want to keep our numbers up because it looks good. It looks good to people that are funding things. It looks good for mission efforts and whatever else. We don't want to also acknowledge the fact that maybe our stance on contraception was wrong. We didn't get the big boom in generations that we have for the last 3 or 4. Certainly the generations are much smaller than they were the last few. So we don't want to acknowledge these things. So whenever you see those data points, just in the issue of fairness, it might not be the most diehard LCMS members that believe those things. Nevertheless, they are still considered LCMS. The LCMS claims them. And in some cases, they might be the ones that attend weekly. I certainly knew many people in multiple congregations across Oklahoma and even outside that do attend LCMS congregations regularly, or pillars of that congregation, that do support things like abortion philosophically, not by action, but they will say, what is your belief on this? This is my belief, that it should be allowed in X, Y, and Z circumstance. And this will never have anything done about it, because that's not harming the respectability and legitimacy of the current crop of limp-wristed conservatives currently running the denomination. And that's why, quite frankly, I'm hoping for a leadership turnover, and I think it can definitely happen. Not because I just want the most right-wing denomination possible, but because I see all these things going on, and it's absolutely not Christian. These are not Christian priorities. The list of enemies they have are not a Christian list, and their reasons for going after everyone they've been going after are in no way recognizably Christian. So I do sincerely hope that this current crop of so-called conservative leadership can be dealt with. I hope they get expelled from their offices.
Yeah, I mean, just even I can tell you for a fact too, like you said. I mean, I'm here in Minnesota, so there are lots of LCMS people, and I know several people who are technically still members that haven't been to church in 20 years. And I also know people that are LCMS that go every Sunday that are like you described, and nothing is done about their views at all. They're not told, well, you belong in the ELCA, not here. That doesn't happen. And that is what is, I mean, you see the same polls, you see that with the PCA as well. And where there's a substantial, I think it's like maybe 35% of the PCA, maybe 40, that says that they are pro-choice in some capacity. Maybe it's up to 20 weeks or whatever, but that abortion should be legal in some cases. And that astounds me, that nothing is done about those things. That's okay. We're not going to deal with those issues. That's culture war stuff. We want to do that. I mean, you have people in the PCA that are pro-gay and pro-gay marriage, all of these things, that's not dealt with at all. And I'm sure, like you said, there are things like that in the LCMS. It's everywhere. You see it with right now, the SBC is trying to make part of their founding documents say that you can't have women pastors and be in the SBC. And there's huge resistance to that, even though it's supposed to be this conservative Baptist denomination or convention. And I mean, on one hand, it's distressing. It is depressing to see the state of things, but on the other, it's sort of a white pill that people are fighting these things, right? That they're not just taking it lying down, and so could you talk about the case for optimism, right? The case for things could get better in the LCMS. You've alluded to it a little bit, but flesh that out some more.
Sure, and I'm actually going to start out with something that may at first seem pessimistic, but I don't think it is. If you could, there's a super chat, I believe, in the catalog for $5. I think by Lower Dirtville is the stated name.
Yeah, right here. I'll bring it up. There we go.
Yeah, so this super chat reads, "The catechism was disputed by pastors and congregations at the 2023 LCMS National Convention. The dispute was pulled at the last minute due to pressures." So what he's talking about there is that this LCMS convention, they had the agenda set before the start, and one of the big issues that the whole conservative wing of the gathering was waiting for was the large catechism. And I believe that there were two points on the catechism there to fight on. One was submitted by the more moderate conservative to liberal wing of the LCMS, congratulating everyone on the large catechism, giving them a performed pat on the back, just to sort of spite this more conservative or traditionalist element in the LCMS. And the other one was an explicit condemnation, if I remember correctly. And this was at the very last day. The board members, the committee members knew what they were doing. They shunted this into the very last possible point, trying to make sure that they could just run out the clock and not have to deal with this. And there was a very large conservative bloc ready to basically just obliterate this catechism. That's my understanding of this. I was not there, but that's what I keep hearing. And to my understanding, when the time came for these proposals to reach the floor, a motion was made to basically just take them out of the consideration, not deal with them at all. And I was personally unhappy with this, just because obviously I am, but they took it out of consideration. It was shunted from the floor entirely. So the conservatives will say, and they do have some merit in saying this, that the liberals didn't have confidence in their position. Why else would they take out this congratulatory effort about the catechism? If they had the support, they would have brought this to the floor and triumphantly paraded around their dominance of the synod over the evil, dirty racists going against this catechism. And they basically, this made it off the floor. So this is obviously a defeat because we didn't get to shoot down this catechism at the convention. And the conservatives will have their reason for justifying why they did what they did, and that's a minor benefit. But the reason I'm optimistic is because there was itself a bloc willing to dispute this. And I am confident that as of last August, that bloc has only grown. Especially as the Synod hierarchy is overextended on just about everything they could have overextended on. As time goes on, as more people keep talking about this, as more people get weary of the world around them, more and more supposedly conservative denominations sliding leftward and ever more leftward. I have a good feeling that this block of people, not only against the catechism, but also against the teachings in the catechism, people that want to make sure that they don't just repeal the book and go home, but actually sort of fix things within this church, I have optimism that this is growing. I don't see how it couldn't be growing, because, and this is a different dynamic that I haven't really discussed anywhere yet, the vast majority of the people against this catechism, they aren't online, and that's not just because they're really old or they're from the greatest or the boomer generation or whatever. It's because they're usually just good pastors who are too busy doing things at the parish level to spend a bunch of time online. Yeah. That's perfectly fine. They're not necessarily, each and every pastor is not necessarily called to go fight everything online. So as more and more of these people get activated, if you will, as they hear more about what's going on in the synod that will directly affect them. So this catechism, as I mentioned earlier, is being used in the seminaries for the classes, and these doctrines are being taught. A large chunk of seminarians, at least one of the seminaries, supports the doctrines. This is going to affect the church that they're in, and certainly it's going to affect what comes after them, because if that congregation ever needs to call a seminarian from the seminaries, that great and solid pastor is going to be replaced by someone that supports the stuff in this catechism. It directly affects everyone in the synod. It's not just some local matter that can be closed off and done and dusted with by just ignoring it. So
Yeah.
I am optimistic that the word is spreading. I'm optimistic that something will be done. I don't know what will be done, or by whom, or to what capacity. But I'm fairly happy with what I'm hearing with some of the bigger names, realizing that this isn't just some good faith Christian discussion on things. This is a bigger, more existential issue. This whole wider corpus of facts. So
Yeah. No, that's encouraging. Honestly, it really is, and I think you're right. I think as the insanity of the world all around us becomes more and more impossible to ignore, right? Because that's always been the thing. I remember 10 years ago, even before Obergefell, right? I was like, things are bad. I was talking about these things. Things are really bad,
right.
guys. Like, things are getting worse culturally. The gay movement and all of these things, it's getting pushed on us hard. I remember talking about homeschooling. You need to get kids out of public school and homeschool. You need to do this. Like, we need to be ready to fight for things that are good. Just falling on deaf ears. No one really cared, right? People just thought I was some weirdo crank. And then Obergefell happens, and after 10 years later, almost, now people are seeing the Pandora's box that was opened. And then, of course, 2020 happens, all the things happen there, and we're still living in the fallout of that. And people are beginning to see it all around us. And to see that, to see the LCMS or the PCA or Series C or any denomination, right? Ones that are supposed to be very conservative just take the knives out against anyone who's to the right of them, especially young men that are to the right of them. While all this stuff is happening all around us, to a normal person, normal lay person in a church, seeing that, there has to be this sense of cognitive dissonance. There has to be this sense of, why are we making a big deal out of this young college student criticizing the catechism and posting things online. It's right wing stuff, but it's not. He's never said anything that I would say is offensive or extreme or anything like that. He's just poking holes in really normie conservatism, if anything. Why are they attacking him? Why are they bringing the hammer down on him? When you're sitting in a church too, and it's like, we've got all these young people that are like living together, and the pastors don't do anything about it, and we have all of these problems all around our society. They don't say anything about it in their sermons, and yet this guy, he's got to go. He's the problem, right? People see that and they think, this is nuts, right? Something needs to change, and so that is, I think it can only get better. Right? We're not in a great place, just evidenced by what has happened to you, but I don't think it's going to stay this way. What do you think?
I think that that's exactly right. I'm not going to bring this up because I want to. This whole time I have not been spending anywhere near a victim narrative as if I'm some helpless creature. But I am going to mention one detail about my person throughout all of this. Whenever all of this started, when Sin started targeting me after I had released everything, basically, and all of this right up until I posted everything to make it public, I was of 19 years of age. And that's I'm not saying that because look at how young I am. I'm saying that because I can't possibly have that much sway in wider society, let alone the church at that age.
Yeah.
I'm saying that to sort of, if you will, elucidate sort of how little reach I can have in the world.
Yeah, and you're a kid. You're right. You're not like you don't have all this sway. You're not like you don't have all this cachet with all these people to be like, listen to me, I'm this big deal. I'm well respected. I am Ryan Turnipseed. Right?
Yeah.
19-year-old kid. Yeah.
And it was so much to the point that I was such an unknown factor that there's probably still a small group of people that think that Ryan Turnipseed is a screen name and not what's on my birth certificate. So
I legit thought that for the longest time, by the way. I thought it was nom de guerre. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that's sort of like how inconsequential I am to the society. I hope that changes as I grow older and as things start swinging in a better direction. Um, there have been quite a number of people, just normal people, influential people, and all this other stuff that have recognized that out of all the major actions that the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has taken in the last few years, one of the most major and most brutal has been against this guy. This guy in Oklahoma, this college student that really is not that consequential if no one had paid attention to him. I don't have very much inherent sway in things. And then they're starting to realize, but we have a whole bunch of other issues that we have been fighting as pastors, as congregations, as just people out in the world that have to go work for a living in a very hostile world to Christians. We've been fighting all of these other things, and the Synod hasn't said a dang thing about them. In fact, in the LCMS context, you have people like Matthew Harrison, whose response to diversity initiatives is to hold up the legacy of W.E.B. Du Bois, the card-carrying black nationalist communist that advocated for a black ethno-state. That was his response to diversity initiatives, was to hold up his legacy. Yeah. So there's a bunch of people saying just sort of the weak and utterly feckless response to the world that the church has given under these moderate conservatives. And suddenly, whenever their prestige and legitimacy and their respectability is threatened by a college student, then suddenly the hammer can go down. We get nothing but the strictest and most categorical of total condemnations. A lot of people have recognized that, well, I guess the church did this whole time have the power to get rid of people who shouldn't have been in here, right or wrong. I guess they did possess that power. They at least possessed the power to speak a little bit more harshly on things that they should have many years ago. Where was that? Where was that when the world was knocking at the doors of Christendom? And why was it silent then? Why now are the weapons being drawn on these people? These very relatively inconsequential people. I certainly do not have as much sway over the church and society as, say, a Supreme Court decision does. So, why the disparity in responses?
Yeah, exactly. Like I think the big problem, not just in the LCMS, but widespread within conservative, Christendom, is they are terrified of having to take a stand on anything that might be unpopular, right? I mean, even just the issue of abortion. Like say those polls are all wrong. They're all people that say they're in LCMS churches and don't actually go. Say it's only 20%. Right. They're still afraid of that 20% of their congregation that votes for people like Joe Biden, or in my state, Tim Walz, where they nearly passed an amendment to the state constitution of Minnesota. And this is one of the most LCMS states in the country, where they would have enshrined abortion up till birth in the state constitution of Minnesota. And I didn't hear anything from any of the LCMS people here in my state. Maybe they did. I want to be fair to them. Maybe they didn't. I didn't hear, but I usually hear about these things. There wasn't some big press conference or press release. Like they did, to their credit, fight the governor here during COVID and say, we want to have the churches back open. That was, that took some courage for sure. But we haven't seen that with this issue at all. Like they're terrified. And I think that polling probably gives some, rationale why, because every single one of these congregations has probably people that are significant to the congregation that contribute a lot in their tithes and are on different boards, elders, deacons, things like that, that they can't offend these people. And we don't want our churches to go smaller. I mean, that's the psychology, especially among the boomer generation of church leadership, is we can't offend people because our churches will shrink and we'll be in trouble if that happens. We'll lose people, and then maybe the church has to close down, or maybe my salary will get cut. Right? It's this fear of doing the right thing, and that's being a hireling, right? That's saying I'm only doing this is just a job, right? For me to get a paycheck. I don't care about the righteousness of God. I don't care about the truth of the gospel. I don't care about the fact that these horrible evils are happening all around us. I'm not going to say anything about it because I gotta get a paycheck.
Yeah,
right? That's what it feels like.
And that's their stated reasoning, but that's clearly not what their actual actions are. Because if the stated reasoning was we can't offend anybody, because we need to make sure, we can't offend anybody because we need bodies in the pews, then I and a bunch of other people would still be considered members in good standing in our LCMS congregations. So in actuality, what this is, and people have been pointing this out for decades since Rick Warren wrote his manifesto on church growth, and this whole movement came about, was that people were pointing out that all this is translating into is watering down not just what the church does in the service, but the doctrine itself, so that it doesn't offend metropolitan interests, so that it doesn't offend people that are too much to the left. But, as has been evidenced by every single action in these supposedly conservative churches, with the mainline conservative, the moderate conservative leadership in each of them, that does not apply to the right, because the right is scary. But for whatever reason, their bodies in the pews don't count as much to their spreadsheet. No. It's the leftist or the moderate bodies in the pews that they care about, and that's why they will purge people to their right. They will draw the knives. They will break procedure. They will invert their theology. They will warp their polity to purge people that are too far to the right, because they view their best prospects at getting bodies in the pews with people that they care about to the left. That's what they are concerned with, and there are some mainline or moderate conservatives that have realized that this is not a tenable position. It's contradictory, and they don't like looking contradictory, even if they might be personally. And they've started coming up with, well, we can't just water down our doctrine to appease the right. Number one, where was this at any other point in time leading up to the last 25 years? That would have been great. We can't water down our doctrine to appease X and Y left-wing group. Where was that? It was nowhere. It held no sway. These things kept going on unopposed. And since these moderate conservatives have been leading the churches and the LCMS at the very least since like the 2010s, I think, maybe slightly earlier. I don't quite remember when Harrison and his group got into power. This power was apparently existing. It existed. They could have clamped down on these things, and they could have done something, but they chose not to. They only chose to the people to their right. And these conservative apologists, their theologians, the people that build up their legitimacy academically and on paper, they're starting to bring out that. So that's the first issue. And the second issue is, are we going to acknowledge maybe the veracity of their claims? Maybe it's not appeasement for this far-right group. Maybe the far-right is not far-right and an error. Maybe the far-right group is far-right and correct. They don't acknowledge this, and they will never acknowledge this. So that's the thing I wanted to mention here. And really quick, this is sort of off topic, but Dr. Jordan B. Cooper, the AALC former seminary president, has been the guy that's been getting dragged the last few weeks by every person that's actually of the right, and justifiably so. This very big compromising figure, sort of a very respectable cocktail party conservative. His big comment on me being excommunicated without mentioning my name in usual Cooper fashion was to say that you don't convert to a denomination and expect it to bend to your will, which.
What did he do? By the way, he wasn't born into Lutheranism, was he?
I was about to say that's personally very revealing. Especially considering he's not in the LCMS, at least by his own admission, if I remember correctly, because he doesn't hold to a 6-day creation account of Genesis. He joined the AALC, which is less dogmatic.
He's a lib.
Yeah. And I've called him as much on my own channel.
Yeah, we could call him that here. He's a lib. Yeah. He's a lib. He likes Star Wars. All right.
Yeah. But more to this point, when he's talking about that we can't just have the far right joining our spaces and bringing it farther to the right, once again, goes back to everything I just mentioned with the last few things. One, where was that earlier with the left? Number two, or maybe it's correct. But with these people, it reveals their interest, and especially Dr. Cooper's and everyone else in the LCMS that follows him, because that's a great deal of the conservative wing of the LCMS, is that, the far right's trying to take over our spaces and bring it farther to the right, which is, once again, purely just something that they will bring out to purge you, as if it's their space, as if the LCMS or Christianity started with their position. It's very solipsistic, as if, number one, they like it, and it's their space, as if they own
We own
Christianity,
it. Yeah.
Christendom, or the LCMS.
Hmm.
And number two, it's this great way of dismissing any actual critique. If anyone's a convert under this logic, whether the convert brings up a point that's right or wrong about the current state of Christendom, they can now be dismissed on this spiritually dead, institutionalist grounds that you can't change the institution because you're a convert. You
Yeah,
weren't
you weren't
born
born
into
into
this.
it. Yeah. No.
Which once again, the guy articulating this was not himself born into it. He was a
Yeah.
convert. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's nuts, man. Like the they play these games, right? And some of it too. I mean, as you were talking there, uh, I wish CJ were here because this is a point he makes all the time. Is that the Christian religion? It's true. It's grounded in reality.
yeah,
It's grounded in the God who made the world, and that therefore inherently right wing. Right, rightism is just a recognition of the created order that God has made. Right,
right.
so
Yes.
it can't like leftism is revolutionary, right, by definition. It seeks to destroy the created order. So it Christianity is going to be right wing, whether you want it to be or not. Dr. Jordan B. Cooper. So too bad, buddy. We own reality. You don't. Right? You can play with your laser swords.
Or you could rephrase that: reality owns us, and they've rejected
Yeah.
it. They are
Yeah.
as great elements of the right keep saying, maybe spiteful mutants against natural reality.
Yeah. That's exactly like that. It's so, it's the meme. It's all so tiresome. But this is the conflict of our age. Ultimately, is the recognition of the created reality, the created order all around us, and the current culture's rejection of that on every front. Right. That's where the conflict is all the time, and so much of certainly like the boomer generation of church leadership has made its peace with that and has found, you have the post-war liberal order where it seems like everything's pretty good. Everything, we've got a world where, Christianity's still respected. We're still, everybody thinks we're good people. And I'm sure you've seen this, Aaron Renn's discussion of like negative world and neutral world and things like that. Uh, that that world doesn't exist anymore, because we reflect the reality that the world hates. Right? They hate that God made men and women, and they're different, and everything about them is different. That we confess those things. That we confess that only men and women can get married and produce offspring. Crazy. We confess all of these realities, and our world, our theology, everything is built around the real world that God made. They hate us for that, right? They hate us and want us to be destroyed because we're the fly in the ointment, right? We show the world that it isn't going to work, right? Your whole construction, right? This rickety house of cards you've built isn't going to stand, right? They hate it. They lash out at us for that, but they want to be at peace with it. They want, right? Jordan Cooper could stroke his beard, and guys like him, and we have them in the Reformed world too. They're called the Davenant Institute. I'm sure you're familiar with them, right? Same kind of guys, same snivelly weasels, and they want to be respected. They want to be thought of as good people. They want they want to have the academic credibility and to be thought of as decent, normal, upright guys. That we're not radicals. We're not these right wing extremists. I mean, yeah, I mean technically we're against abortion and homosexuality and things like that. We wouldn't really emphasize any of that stuff, right? We don't, but we're very much against racism, just like you. We just want to make that very clear. Like that, those are their priorities, right? Making peace with the world that hates us, right? That's what they are about. That's what they've always been about. And what I see is the influence of these people is waning rapidly, right? They still have the institutional credibility. All the institutions, right, still back them because they toe the line and all this stuff. But regular people see them and think they're nuts, right? Regular people see like, what is wrong with you, right? Why are you going like even with like the Christian nationalism discussion, people freaking out about those things and saying, oh, like if this just this week, there's all this discussion about Schmittianism and friend-enemy distinction and things like that. And wouldn't you know it, all of the really smart guys that know all of the historic Reformed and Protestant theology pull up all of these quotes where these reformers are talking about friend-enemy distinction, right?
Explicitly.
Centuries. Yeah, explicitly in those terms. Centuries before Carl Schmitt ever was born. And what they can't do anything about that. It's like this is baked into the cake. This is just reality that is being described. And you have in the political, you have enemies, right, that are existential that you have to oppose. And all this is going on, mind you, while the president of the United States, right, maybe the legitimate one, is being tried over nothing, right? He's being tried over. I mean, the New York one is just bananas, right? Where he has this lawyer stealing all this money from him and paying off this like porn star or whatever, and it's totally bogus. Every part of it, they aren't. I mean, it sounds like the trial of Trump actually sounds just like your excommunication proceedings, where right, the rules of evidence are not followed, the charges are exaggerated or unclear, and it's, he at least has higher courts that'll immediately overturn it, if probably when he gets convicted. But you have a president of the United States being tried over these things. You have the FBI sent into his home with orders to shoot on sight anybody that resists them, right? Like insane banana republic stuff happening all around you, and then they say like, that's just unchristian to think of these people as enemies, right? That's really bad. You can't do that.
Regarding the friends and enemies things itself, I did post this, and I'm certainly not the first one to articulate this issue. But I do wonder how these people that insist that a Christian has no enemies are meant to love their enemies, as Christ commands. It's a very strange thing that they are, and these are the same people that will lecture you about the links that you go to oppose your enemies. It's unchristian. Okay, well then how am I supposed to treat my enemies? Oh, well, you're not supposed to have them. Oh, is that so? So, what's your enemy list? Oh, it's the people too far to the right, of course.
Yeah. And how do they treat people that they have declared their enemies? Right. They don't
exactly.
treat them with kindness. Right. They don't heap hot coals on their heads. They do trials where they're not allowed to defend themselves. They do. They don't follow just basic normal procedure. Right. They just railroad people out. It's really telling the way these people. And this is a point that Stephen Wolfe has made repeatedly. These people that say, "Oh, you can't have enemies," right? The people that deny friend-enemy distinction the hardest, the most vocally, are the ones that if you step out of line and oppose them in any way, boom, you are an enemy and you are treated as such. And there are no holds barred whatsoever for you, right? That's like, those are the people you got to be very wary of. Anybody that denies it, like, it's just a case of projection, right? I'm very adept at practicing friend-enemy distinction. I'm just going to lie about it, basically.
Right, yeah. And that's, at the risk of being uncharitable, I think the vast majority of these people know what they're doing. Or if at the very least, I think that they might have the introspection enough to realize what they're doing, maybe even after the fact. Maybe they didn't intend to do it when they started it. But in this case, in my case in particular, since that's the one I can speak to, when I'm being told that there are people on high pushing for this, when I know for a fact that the Synod hierarchy is involved, and it shouldn't be, we are more congregationalist in our polity than Episcopal.
Yeah.
So they shouldn't have jurisdiction over this local congregation, but they were pushing for all of this. Whenever I'm told that the pastor that is personally accepting responsibility for everything that's going on did like a fifth of the research by his own sayings, or a quarter, or whatever it was, I'm beginning to think that, maybe I shouldn't really just listen to anything that comes out of these people's mouths, because they consistently lie about who's responsible for what, whether they do or don't have enemies, whether you should or shouldn't have them, how you're supposed to treat them. Certainly they don't follow their own sayings on that last part. And if they do say you're supposed to pray for your enemies, every single time that I see anyone praying for these supposed excommunicants, if I, in the Lutheran side of things, if I am supposed to believe that these heresy hunters that have gone after the far right and nobody else believe what they say they believe, they're supposed to be praying mournfully about these excommunicants that they could um, just be welcomed back into the church with loving arms. But every single time that you see them performatively and publicly praying, like say a certain group of people around the turn of the BC to AD, when they're publicly and performatively praying, it's always about how they're so wrong and racist, and I just wish they would drop all their most egregious and terrible sins listed off here forth as X, Y, Z, and whatever else. It's no one prays like this. In my own excommunication, as you can see in their public video, Reverend Joseph Hiley gets up and does this very performative prayer that he's never done before, certainly not when I was attending. And I mean, I was there long before he was even ordained. I organized the wind ensemble for his ordination service. I was there up until the story started. He gave this very performative prayer saying, "Lord, grant me the I forget what he says, like the eyes to see, basically, grant that I may learn to repent," and all this other stuff, very performatively. You can go and watch it yourself. This is not normal behavior. It's not in our liturgy. He has never once done this publicly, and why would he? This is I certainly would be shocked if that doesn't weigh on his own conscience, especially considering that he and his church publicized all of these things, the video itself especially. Why the Pharisaical treatment and all this other stuff? Well, I'm inclined, at the very least, just for practical shrewdness, something that Christians are supposed to do as commanded in the New Testament, or advised in the New Testament at the very least. In the ends of shrewdness, I'm just not going to take anything that these guys say at face value. They've proven themselves that if they aren't lying, then they at the very least are so wildly inconsistent that you should not trust their words on their face.
Yeah. That's the wisest approach in this. And again, like the thing that I repeatedly go back to with all these things, not just in the LCMS, but that I don't want to think ill of these people. I'm not like waking up in the morning with an axe to grind thinking, who can I hate today? Who can I
oppose? Exactly.
Like I want there to be peace in the church. I want these conservative denominations to wake up and see what is going on all around us and stand up for what's right, and not have this dissension and fighting amongst themselves. Right? I hate it. It's horrible. I don't want that.
Right.
But I don't think it's going to happen until there are changes in leadership.
Certainly.
Quite frankly, it is. I think the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years even, the leaders that we have brought us to this place where the church is not able to stand up for righteousness publicly, and for whatever reason. I mean, we've talked about a few of them already, but we haven't done that, and we've built everything around doing the opposite of that, and that has to change. And I feel like God is bringing us to a place where we can't do anything but change how we are operating, and so even in the midst of the massive black pill all around us, the white pill for me is that he's backing us into a corner where all we could do is change what we were doing, where we have no other option left for us. And I'm excited about the future, actually. Like these conflicts are painful. I know they're personally, very painful for you. And it's unpleasant, right? We are not seeking them out. We don't want these. Like I'm sure the day the catechism was published, you weren't like, oh, yippee, this is great. I can't wait to go online and start fights, right? You're not looking for these things, but you, at the same time, they're out there, and that the fight is coming, and all you can do is stand up for what is right and have courage. And that's one of the things I definitely want to commend you for, because I think, how old were you when, like, the on the thread that you posted with the recordings, how old were you when that happened? What, 21, 22?
So when I posted the thread, I had just turned 20, and for the entire content of the thread, I was 19.
Man, I don't know. Everyone listening there, I could tell you when I was 19, I would not have had the wherewithal to be able to stand up for myself in that manner. And I'm just blown away by the fact that you were able to, and that you stood your ground, and that you were not manipulated. I mean, because the whole thing, I listened to it, when you posted it, so manipulative, right? Everything, just not just the situation and the context, very manipulative, but the language, the framing, all of it, it was like designed to bully this kid into breaking down, and you never did. I mean, I'm blown away by it, man. I'm really I'm not saying it to flatter you at
Well,
all, but you're an example of to all of. I'm almost 20 years older than you, and it's an example to me. So I'm very proud to know you and um, to see the courage under fire that you've demonstrated. So I mean, thank you so much, Ryan. I don't know if we have how much more time you have. I only wanted to go for an hour today, but
sorry.
no. It's been great. No apology necessary. This has been exactly the kind of stuff I wanted to find out, because it is for everybody, whether you're in the LCMS or not. This is important for everyone to see. These are the things that will happen if you have politics that is just slightly outside the Overton window. Right. That's the thing. Like, you are not this extremist. I've read and listened to many, maybe most of the things you've written and said in podcasts and things like that. Not everything. So maybe you've said some crazy stuff I don't know about. but it's all been great and commendable. And the kind of stuff that when my sons are 19 and 20 years old, I want them to be as well spoken and well thought out as you are.
Well, thank you.
And it's like, this is important for everyone to see, right? What is happening in conservative denominations, because I don't think it's going to end, right? I don't think you're going to be the last person that this has happened to. Like, other young men are going to get railroaded. And they're going to need to have the same courage that you showed. So again, thank you, Ryan, and thank you for coming on. I'm very happy to tell your story and make sure it gets out there for more people to see. But before we go, I mean, is there anything you want to plug? I know you have the Old Glory Club conference coming up. Are you speaking at that, or are you?
So I'm actually going to be the MC, so I'll be making sure. Last year I was lauded for my ability to make the talks run on time. Was a good joke that was going around. So, but that last year it wasn't an OGC conference, so I was emceeing a separate conference. But that was I think that was part of the reason why I was reselected. Was people seem to have been happy with that level of order. But just before I plug myself very quickly, I would like to thank certainly everyone that stood by me, and you yourself as well, because it was your efforts that got, I think, my first article out on this whole thing before anything had happened to me. You got me published on Gab, so yeah, thank you, and everyone else that spread the word. If no one had spread the word outside of me, nothing would have happened. I wouldn't be here talking about this. There wouldn't have been an issue at all. Things would have just been going as they were in 2022. So this is entirely a collective effort. I'm certainly not some mastermind or planner that is, I'm not commanding armies or something. I just throw things out into the public sphere and hope that people take it and run with it. So yeah, thank you and anyone else that has propelled everything to this point. And then beyond that, yes, the Old Glory Club is hosting our first conference. And that is going to be, let me just double check this so that I don't give a wrong date. That is going to be starting on June the 7th and lasting until June the 9th. If I remember correctly, I think there are single-digit number of tickets left. Ooh. So if anyone is interested in it...
You better act now.
Yeah, you better act now. The tickets may look like a large cost, but it includes lodging, food, and all the talks. So, weigh it out that it's happening over the course of... starting on Friday evening, ending on Sunday evening. It's a very, very great value for the cost, I would say, and I would, if you're undecided, I would certainly implore anyone to go if you can make it.
Where is it? What town? What city is it?
So I don't actually remember what all we've publicized because we try to keep the exact location. Okay. Under wraps, but
got it.
Typically, it is in the Upper South, okay. And certainly if you purchase the ticket, you will be told it's near the the general Tennessee area would be the
Okay.
that upper South region. So
I see. Well,
that's the old
unfortunately, I'm not going to be. I'm going to the New Christendom conference. That is
right.
unfortunately the same week or same weekend. But maybe next year. Maybe next year I'll have to
Yeah,
make an appearance
yeah.
and hang out with
This
all you guys.
the intention is that this will be the annual conference. So this should be
Mm.
the first annual Old Glory Club conference. We have an excellent lineup of speakers, including Aaron McIntyre, Jeff Dice,
Mm.
the former president of the Mises Institute, John Doyle. We have quite a few people from uh, the more sort of niche right wing side of things. Stephen Carson, some people might know him from Twitter.
Hmm.
Very, very good father, very good man, a good thinker. Charlemagne is a very influential YouTube channel elucidating sort of neo-reactionary stuff, and he has a great account. Writes for the OGC. So a lot of our OGC guys, a few people we picked out of the audience, so people that submitted pitches. So there will be some new voices there. There'll be some very well established voices there. I hope anyone that is wanting to make it can certainly act quickly before we run out of room, because we are right up to the end of our supply.
Nice.
Beyond that, I have articles on the Old Glory Club, which you can find the Substack or the website if you just Google that name. We're at the point where you can just search Old Glory Club or the Old Glory Club. You will find us. Um, I write sometimes for the Mises Institute, the Mises Wire. You can find that at Mises.org. That's the more economic side of things, because believe it or not, I do have a professional interest in economics and entrepreneurship. I do things outside of the culture and theological sphere of things. And other than that, I have a YouTube channel, Ryan Turnipseed. I recently, it's a little bit more infrequent there, but I recently had a series on neoconservatives and what they wrote, trying to show that the accusation of neocon is much worse than you could possibly imagine when you level it at someone, if you could imagine that.
I
Um,
can't. Yeah.
one of the yeah, I had a video on Norman Podhoretz. It was probably the most uncomfortable stream I've ever done. So that might be don't watch that in front of your small children, because not because I or my guests say anything wrong, but because Norman Podhoretz is really weird. So
Yeah.
uh, you can go find that on my YouTube channel, Ryan Turnipseed. And finally, on Twitter, everything we've been alluding to that I made public is on the account at Turnip Merchant, all one word. Or Ryan Turnipseed is also what the account is under, so you can find me there. The thread that I have pinned in my account, that's where all the published information is at. And you can find recently my excommunication announcement, since I was only made aware of that after it happened. And I was made aware because one of my friend's wife, his wife, found it on Facebook, sent it to him, and he sent it to me. So you can find that on my Twitter.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. For all of you watching, listening, make sure you like and subscribe and go to contramundumpodcast.com.
Yes.
We just had a discussion with Steve Saylor last week that was for the subscribers, for the people that give us money on the shill stack. So we really appreciate all of you that do that, and we're going to have more guests as well for the private subscription on top of everything else we do. CJ will return, Lord willing, next week. But until then, thank you all for watching and listening. Stay peacefully dangerous, and we will see you next time.